Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold. We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC.
It's getting nice and heavy.
Now, welcome our hosts, John the Vernomatic Verno, and direct from New Jersey, Metal Walt.
Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy, enjoying the springtime. Well, tonight we got a real special episode for you. Maybe one of the biggest ones we've ever done. We have Bernard McMahon, the writer and producer of the Led Zeppelin documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin. Metal Walt, you got a little backstory behind how we got Bernard onto the show. Why don't you share that and your thoughts on this show?
Well, we got Bernard, which is exclusive territory. He's not doing interviews on shows like Metal Mayhem ROC. And because of a personal meetup through a friend of mine, we were able to land him. The amazing part of this episode, John, is he takes us through the whole process where he created this storyboard like 7 years before it actually launched. He had no idea whether this was going to get accepted or not. But it looks like because of his reputation on some other work he's done, Jimmy Page and the other guys basically said, have a go at it. The only thing, though, is it's not authorized by Led Zeppelin. It's endorsed as an independent film.
Yeah. He explained in the conversation that Jimmy Page and Robert Plant and John Paul Jones, they encouraged him as an artist to create something, and the guys in Zeppelin opened up their address books, brought tons of media and pictures to the meetings, and really were engaged in this. But yet, like Walt said, they didn't have any artistic control. They didn't say what could be in there, what couldn't be in there. And this project sort of just organically developed into something very special. And if you've seen it, you realize that. And if you haven't seen it, after you listen to this exclusive Metal Mayhem ROC interview, you will get out and see it. It's being reintroduced into cinemas as we speak today.
And John, you are so right. He adds so much more color. He's like a color commentator for the film. And, we both have seen the film, and when you listen to him, you say, oh, my God, now that makes sense. But what I think the listeners should be aware of, the two best parts of this are, number one, the unknown dynamic between the three living members of Zeppelin and what he wasn't expecting them to bring to the table. And then the other side of it is the filmmaker piece, like how he pieced together these whole movies and these old videos and these photos, and how he tied it in to make this sonically amazing audio product.
And then to expand on that, the uniqueness of these three unearthed audio interviews with John Bonham. There's so much in this, so let's just get to it. It's Bernard McMahon, the writer, producer, mastermind behind Becoming Led Zeppelin. For Metal Walt, I'm the Vernomatic, and this is Metal Mayhem ROC. Today's guest is the mastermind behind the smash new documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and it's great for him to be here today. Bernard McMahon, welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC. How are you, sir?
Very well, and pleasure to meet you both.
Well, the movie, I can't say it enough. It's just, I'm a big Zeppelin fan, but this exceeded all of my expectations. I watched it a couple times. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to the IMAX, but I spent the weekend watching it on one of the streaming services. It came out in February in IMAX globally. How's the reception been around the world from critics and fans alike?
Well, then they're putting it out in America again on Friday in a whole bunch of cinemas. So that's like the most wonderful thing you can have. My only dream for the film is I just hope that the film would play at my local cinema in Santa Monica and would pop up every few months. It'll be there, you know. And that was all I hoped for. And the local art house, Lemley Cinema, I never dreamed that it would be at IMAX.
So it's going back to IMAX. Maybe I'll
I don't know. I must confess, I don't know. It's just suddenly there's been all this interest in more people wanting to see it in the cinema. And so I'll have to check on all I know is it's in like 150 cinemas or so in America from Friday.
Oh, that's awesome. So tell us about it. What kind of response have you been getting from fans? It came out in February. What's the response been like?
It's probably one of the most wonderful things I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, this is like a story that I felt that inspired me when I was 12 years old. The early part of their lives. It was a big inspiration on how I became a filmmaker, and so I'm meeting people that are coming out of the cinema, and they come up to me and they tell me what they've seen and what they think of it, and they have exactly the same emotional response that I did after 5 or 6 years making it. In 2 hours, they're at the same place I am. And that is the most unbelievably wonderful feeling. It feels like you've gone up the darkest depths of the Amazon and come back, and you've shown this 2-hour film, and everyone is talking like they've been there too. And so the audience, when they watch it, they understand everything I've learned. And the team have learned in 6 years. They've learned all that.
Well, you can see my excitement. Yeah, you see my excitement, bud.
Yeah, so you're at the same place I am. What you know and see, it seems to come in the film, is what I feel having been in that world. Yeah.
So Bernard, there have been a lot of unauthorized Led Zeppelin documentaries released over the years, but as we understand it, this is the first authorized film. So how did you
got to be
gain the
careful
trust?
about that word authorized. I mean, this is not your fault. I think this is something that the studio puts out. This film is very unusual in that regard, and I would say this is a big compliment to Led Zeppelin. This film is an independent movie. The band are not producers of the film, and they did not want or request any editorial control over the film. I presented the idea of the film, they were like, artist to artist, go away and make it. What we will do is we'll appear in it and we'll talk in it and we will let you use the music, but you make the film. It's your movie. So I think that's unprecedented with an entity as big as this is. And so if they actually commit to do something, what I've found with them is they're very artist friendly. Certainly was to me with this. So it's the first time, yes, they've ever agreed to participate fully in a film about telling their story. And so
now, why was that? Why was that though? Because again, historically, they take a very sort of a standoffish approach on documentaries. And like, what was different this time around?
Well, I came in and I discovered that they actually were very familiar with my previous 4 films, which were these films called American Epic, about the very first blues, gospel, and country records made in the 1920s, which is basically the DNA of almost all contemporary groups, including Led Zeppelin. All their DNA is from that music. And so they were familiar with that film. So that series of films, which we made with Robert Redford and Jack White and T-Bone Burnett and a host of other people that helped out. And so I wanted to do a follow-up film, and I wanted a movie that was on the next era of music, which was like World War II, maybe up to 1970. And I knew the Led Zeppelin story from a tiny little paperback book that was published in the mid-70s, just called Led Zeppelin. I'd read that book as a little boy, and that book was hugely helpful in how I became a filmmaker, because it was all about the process of how John Paul Jones, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Bonham, how they went from their teenage years through to their meeting and how they made this group. It was like how they did it. That's what I got from the book. And I read the book twice. It's been out of print for years and years. Most people don't know it. And some of the Zepp fans say most of that information has been lost. So I think this little thing in me, this 12-year-old boy, when it was the next film, wanted to meet these people and see if what was in the book was true. This thing that had inspired me to become a filmmaker were these guys as I remembered them as in the book. And they were, you know? And so it's really, that's the background for film. So I do a lot of preparation when I make films. And so we spent about 7, almost 8 months writing a script and storyboarding the film, which is where you have images for every single scene and tracking down archive, every bit of archive, and then trying to find archive that hadn't been seen before. So I did all this work. And I think I had a sort of very kind of like, elliptical conversation without going into any details of what we were doing with someone at the record label. And they said something like, oh, they will never agree to do a film. And I went, great, because that's what we like doing. I like doing films that have never been told before, you know, and people. So we just did the work. And then I reached out to the band and got to meet each of them one by one, Jimmy Page first. And my meeting with him was 7 hours long going through this storyboard. 7 hours. So it's like serious. And he was like, but very quickly, he just became really interested in the story that we were telling. And I remember it was just a kind of wonderful conversation because he was just adding to it. And he was, oh yeah, and that happened, then this happened, and this happened. So it was really, I mean, the lesson for me was like, just do the preparation work. Like we work really, really hard getting ready for that. And I do that with everything, whether the person's well known or not. Just try and learn everything you possibly can and be ready for it. And he said, yes. He said, go ahead. And I had to go and meet John Paul Jones. I had a similar meeting, like 4 or 5 hours with him. And this amazing guy emerged. It was so, you know, the guy you see in the film, which I'd never seen, just super funny, like relaxed, kind of like you can relate to him. And then Robert, I met Robert, and Robert was kind of very sensitive, you know, privately, like it's a touching guy, like emotional, you know, and then he was like that on camera, this thing where he's like telling you who he is, you know, and I just thought the film is like, this is how you do it. Like strip away all the stuff that comes later. This is how you get from being a little kid with nothing to becoming the biggest group in the world. This is how it's done. Well, this is how they did it, and it might be helpful to you, you know? And that's really what they gave. And so, yeah, so it's kind of, and interestingly, they put quite a lot of pressure on it because when they said, great, yeah, you make it, it means, well, it's all down to us if it works or not, you know?
Yeah, now Led Zeppelin, if you will, is opened the door and telling Jimmy Page is telling you to go make art. You're on the hook. But one of the best parts of this, and we'll get to the interviews with the 3 remaining, but the John Bonham media that you have, talk about that because that is amazing. Elaborate on that.
I wanted him to have, I didn't know how we would do it because there were no known interviews with him other than like a couple, 2 or 3 sentences. But I thought it's absolutely vital that we feel this man, we get to spend time with him. How can we do it? So I just had this belief in my heart that somewhere there was recordings of him. And I knew it would probably be early because he absolutely didn't do any kind of interview. So we just had this massive, massive search. And I eventually came across this bootleg from what appeared to be from what they were talking about from around 71. And it was him and Robert talking. And it was a professional radio interview, you could tell, because the journalist wasn't talking over him. And I could hear, even though it was a copy of a copy, it was obviously a 1/4-inch tape. Because when you make documentary films, you get to understand media. You know what you're looking at. Even if it's like a crummy VHS, you can go, this originally was a 35mm print. And so I was listening to it, and all I had to go on was the journalist had an Australian accent. So I just sent bits of the journalist to every Australian radio person, old person I knew, and eventually I got the guy's name. and then found out what radio station he worked at in Australia, which in 90, and then called the radio station, and they went, after a couple of weeks, we can't find that tape. And I said, have you ever sent any of your tapes to an archive? And they go, well, actually, yeah, we did send some stuff to the University of Canberra. So I called the University of Canberra, and they looked for a week or two, and they didn't have it. And then as I was about to put down the phone, I went, do you have any uncatalogued tapes? And they went, thousands. And I went, well, you remember you did that festival for our previous film, American Epic, and we gave you all stuff and did a conference with it and introduced it. Could you help us out and look? And they agreed. And then I think it was months later, we got a phone call, and he said, get to your phone, like that. And I plugged it up, and he had emailed EXA, and they'd found this 1/4-inch reel. And then I persuaded them to send it over to Burbank so we could actually get the best transfer off of it. And then when that came in, I found 2 other short American interviews from around the same time. And so that's the audio. And the quality was unbelievable on all of them. And the amazing thing was, he was saying stuff that none of the other band members had commented on. So he was providing, like, he said stuff that when I initially met the group that they hadn't referred to, you know, like because he's right at the time. He's talking right. He's literally there as it's happening, you know? And so, you know, he was the one that says no one in Britain wanted to book the group, you know? I mean, no one was interested in the Yardbirds because at that point they were the Yardbirds still, you know? And so the Yardbirds, in terms of old British A&R men, well, they hadn't had a hit in 2 or 3 years. So they were just like completely washed up. So he was like, we couldn't get arrested. We couldn't get any decent bookings. So we had to go to America. So he was right. He was close to that time. And really nice. And it was very emotional when the band heard it. It was really, you know,
with this day and age, 2025, and YouTube and the internet, there was no way of finding any of this material because, Bernard, let's admit it, you found a needle in a haystack. This Bonham media. Through your research, you couldn't. There was no other Bonham media available anywhere.
No, there was nothing there that you could use for a film. I found one other recording, which was 2 other recordings that I tracked down journalists that had interviewed him for newspapers, but they were literally like little cassette players put on a table with drums clattering. I won't use that type of audio in a theatrical movie because if I hear some really bad audio and someone, I assume it's a criminal and it's a you know, a wiretap, you know. So that's just, so you got to have good quality audio. Otherwise, it's unfair to the guy. You immediately suggest something, you know, that is a different type. So yeah, what I like is when I remember meeting when I was talking with Robert Plant and initially pitching the film, and he said something really nice. He brought Pat Bonham with him, John's wife, and he said, I'd really like to do this. This actually is really nice, and this is a really kind of very special period in the band for me when it was all starting. I think for Robert, it was very exciting and emotional. It was for all of them, but it was particularly, he really meant a lot to him this time. And going out to the West Coast, he was so fascinated by that whole bohemian West Coast culture that was from San Francisco, which is a massive deal if you were musically plugged in. That stuff in 67, 68 is huge. And so if you're a British guy like Robert and super tuned into music, to be in a band that's the destination, that's where you're going for. Super exciting. And so he said, I'd love you to do this. It was great. And he said, but how are you going to tell this story? He said, because I don't know, there's not enough film footage for a full-length feature movie. And you can't have John in it, surely. So there was this great thing of like, can we overcome this, you know? And so what I do like is if you can surprise the subjects of the film with what you get. Like if the person that was actually there, you get stuff that they haven't seen and heard, that tells me you're on the right track. So that's one of my first stops when I make movies is is the people that are being interviewed, have you got stuff that they're going, where'd you get that from? And we kind of go, we're in the right, but it's a ton of work to do that. You just got to be relentless searching. But it was mainly this, ultimately it's going, it's Led Zeppelin struck me as a group from what I read when I was 12 to then meeting them, that these are 4 absolutely irreplaceable individuals that Jimmy has brought together, and some of whom have come to him. Like Robert brings John Bonham in, but he kind of like is putting this thing together and has got this vision for this group. But you take any of those musicians out as Jimmy, and they will tell you wouldn't have Led Zeppelin anymore. And so that was why, to me, it was super important that you hear this guy, that you hear him talking, and I want the audience to feel him. And that was really nice. And so, yeah. And well, the loveliest thing was the film played when it was in the Midlands, one of John's best friends, who hadn't obviously spoken to him in 45 years since he died, went to see the movie, and he went, it was like I was back there in the living room with him again. He was right there. It was like he was right there again. That was like really choked me up.
That's awesome. That's special, Bernard. That is special.
Metal Mayhem ROC.
Talking about some of the other content in watching the film, I'm curious how you track down some of this other stuff in addition to the John footage. So I'll point out a few things that I thought were really cool for me, right? The childhood photos, the whole movies, but then Jimmy Page takes out this diary dated 1964. Then later on, there's a letter where it's, I guess, Atlantic Records inviting Jimmy to New York City to sign the eventual contract. And then later on, Robert takes out a notebook that has the lyrics to Ramble On. Like, where the hell did this stuff come from?
The first thing, it was like a wonderful surprise, is that you kind of sometimes you get back what you give. So we'd done all this work and we presented this to them, and there was a lot of care and love in how this thing was presented and put together before we shot it. How we're going to do it. When it came to the interviews, each one of them turned up with literally bags full of archive and went, here's photographs, sound recordings, and whatnot. And it was all stuff I'd never seen before. So they'd gone through their personal things and went, here's this stuff. And I remember I was in Robert's house, I was in Jimmy's house, and he kind of laid out all this stuff additional to what he brought to the interview, and have a look through and see what you'd like to use, and then I went to see Robert at his house. Wonderful, lovely and beautiful, really lovely old British homes they live in. I went to Robert's plant's house, and there was this amazing area where he played music, I think, and had record players and stuff like that. And he just had these boxes of photographs, masses of boxes of photographs. And he went, look through and see if there's anything you want in there. And it was just, they were really, really generous with that. It was like, here you go. And then Jonesy's ones, which was amazing because there's so little of their early lives online. But John Paul Jones, there's nothing at all. There's no pictures of him as a kid or anything. And so when he brought these photographs of him as a boy, him with his dad, his parents' vaudeville act, it was like, oh my God, we're actually here, because I thought, how are we going to show some of these things? And he had these photographs. So that was where part of it came from. And then other things were just like when we were talking with John Bonham, and talking with his wife, and Deborah, his sister. Deborah said, I've got some films, 8mm films. My dad, John on my dad's Jack, he had a 8mm camera and he used to shoot a lot of stuff. Well, God bless Jack Bonham, because clearly they must have developed these films and only played them once on the projector because they were pristine. And so the one guy that's not living and able to be on camera, there's all this home movies of him as a child with his first drum kit playing with it. And it was like, it felt like that just after all this work, it was like him coming in and going, here you go, here's me on camera for you, And so And then, it was just a lot of it's like I tell you why some of this stuff gets found. I'm talking to you now. There's a theory I've got why this happens. I think that, to me, if we're telling a story, there's only one story. There's the actual story of what it is. And if you really study it, you go, if I'm telling a truthfully story, it's this, leads to this, this is the story. And you've got to tell that story regardless of whether there's film footage of it. And the problem with a lot of filmmaking involves having the film footage you've got dictate the story. So you've got some film footage of some concert and it's beautiful, but that concert is not a significant event in this story. But the concert there isn't film footage, that's where it's Altamont or something, and there's some big event that happens that's hugely significant. Well, you can't let the archive shape what the story is, because the story is the truth, it's what happened, and what the key emotional beats are. So if you stick with that, it forces you to look for stuff to illustrate the things that there's no footage and by saying I have to illustrate, it means you find stuff. That's what I find. You go, we've got to be at San Francisco in January 69 before anyone really knows who this group is. How do we do that?
Well, that leads to a quick question. If you have all this unexpected media, does it blow up your storyboard? Do you pivot a little and like, wow, we have all this stuff that we never even thought of? Does it almost regenerate the creative process? There has to be something. You start getting 8mm of Bonham playing drums as a 8-year-old?
Yeah, well, sure, that's going in there. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's two things. Yes, I don't think it bends the story out of shape. No. What I think the film is like, do you remember there was that puzzle called a Rubik's Cube where you have to get all the sides to match up? I look at the only way I can work in this. I look at a movie as like a Rubik's Cube, and there is a perfect version of that film. And your process, painful it is to try to get to that thing where it's all the emotional beats and the story, and you've got it on the big screen. And to me, it's obviously either right or it isn't. And if there's one of those colors that is in the wrong place, I can see it. So I'm trying to do that and illustrate that. So all the search for the archive is in the goal of trying to make that perfect film where all the things that you know to be significant, you're giving them to your audience and they're on screen. Everything that you've learned over years is important. It's all there. They can see it and they walk away understanding it. So the archive to me is a means to an end. It's like to get the audience there. So what we're doing is when we get a performance, I'm looking going, well, I want the audience to feel like they're there. So I want shots of the crowd, the people watching it, the marquees. So you start looking, is there other rushes? So we use every cinematic technique in the book we can to make you feel like you're there at the shows. And that's why it's particularly cool in cinemas, because in an IMAX, you're almost at the concerts. But because it's Led Zeppelin and it's stereo for when they were making records and mono leading up to it, it also works well domestically. But I recommend definitely trying to get some good speakers next to your TV, because it will pay off with this film. The better system you play it on, the more you'll get out of it,
Well, you mentioned in the film the transitions. The circulating papers, it's the transition in the film, like the marquees and the ticket stubs. And those ticket stubs, there's a lot of bad continuity on the spelling of some of the Led Zeppelins in there. I noticed a lot of
you guys you're very well observed for two watches. That's an in joke. Wow. So it's an in joke, and basically, the funny thing is, because Zeppelin happened so fast, so quickly, in terms of like getting out to America, clearly all these bookings for their shows are being done over the phone. Like, will you book Led Zeppelin? And whoever's booking the show is just writing down with a pen how they think Led Zeppelin is spelled. So you get Led, L-E-A-D, Zeppelin, but then you get concert adverts for Len Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Stuff like this. And I noticed that early on, when you got the shots of the records being put in the record bins from '69, the band's names misspelled on the bin card. And so I saw Led Zeppelin misspelled more than any other group that I'm aware of in that first year. And so I kind of delighted with all the tickets in including some of the more funnier misspellings in there. Because you saw them so regularly when you go through all the archive, you go, God, look at the amount of times this name is spelled in all different weird ways. And so it's very striking to me. So I it was one of the things, because it's a lot of humor in the film. It's kind of funny, you know, and they're funny. And so, yeah, so that was it. And I'm also a big fan of old movies, like from the 30s and 40s, like a huge fan of early cinema. The other big thing that got me into making movies was watching them, but reading David Niven's The Moon is a Balloon. So it was David Niven's The Moon is a Balloon, Moss Hart's Act One, and this little Led Zeppelin paperback. Those were my big inspirations. So a movie book, a theater book, and a music book. And I remember with the David Niven book, it got me. I was reading about all these old movies, and I love the way old movies, they don't waste your time with exposition. They tell you with visuals on the screen. We're now in January, February, March, April, and so we're trying to use every visual technique to move the story forward without people having to talk unnecessarily, so that the group are focusing on the emotional content. This is the stuff I think that the audience is they want that kind of personal interaction with them, where they're talking to you like they're a relative. They're super relaxed and they're going, this is where we were. This is how I felt, rather than, and then in January went to this. Then in February we got then we booked some days. Yeah, you want to limit that. And if you can show that on screen, oh, right, okay, we're here. Now we're here. And then not having to say all that. It means that you want everything, if you possible, coming out of the stars' voices in a movie to be interesting stuff, you know, not just exposition. And so, yeah, I learned that from the old movies. And of course, the other bonus is it gives you an opportunity to show the audience this super rare stuff, because those are all the real posters and tickets. There's no JPEGs or anything in here. It's all the physical memorabilia, and we're filming them being dropped onto the screen. And so here's an opportunity. So you can looking at the shows, you're seeing the audience, you're seeing the venues, but you're also seeing the ticket stub you would have held. You're seeing the poster that would be and that with Zeppelin, that stuff is really rare and really expensive now.
That was the actual ticket stubs and actual posters?
Yes.
Well, did the Zepp guys provide that? Where did you get that? That's amazing.
From the Zeppelin guys. No, I actually got those from there was a couple of collectors. One particular really amazing collector called Brian Knapp, who has the most amazing, like, what I'd call ephemera collection on Zeppelin, which is like the hardest stuff to get in, is like posters, tickets, and he had amassed this enormous collection. He was so kind, and he literally sent us these actual things and let us film them. So yeah, it was those are the real things. That's the other thing. I found, I think, a ticket or two that he didn't have, because I wanted, when the film comes out, him to see something on the screen. He goes, "Where'd you get that from?" So we'll do every competition with ourselves to try and get it as high as we can. So if there's anyone that's trying to help, you surprise them. So you make it like it's almost like your kids when you're doing stuff, and you go, "Okay, you've done that. What can I get?" You know, so kind of before it comes out, if you can win some competitions with each other, hopefully the audience are going to go, "Wow, where'd all this stuff come from?" So you're kind of pushing each other on.
Bravo.
Hey, Bernard, talking about the concert footage, it's no secret a lot of the archives have been circulating for decades out there on YouTube, old bootlegs and that kind of thing. But what I observed is there was some editing done, at least I think, but maybe even more than that, the audio quality on these performances. I was playing it today as I was working at my kitchen table. I had my little Alexa watching the movie, and I'm working, and the sound quality coming out of it was just unbelievable. Like, what did you do to kind of up the game with this video and the audio?
Actually, really, Thank you very much. A quite eccentric choice was made, which was to do nothing to it. So, and how to do that is the audio is the equivalent of us cutting a pineapple off a tree in Kauai and slicing it in half and putting it on your plate. 5 minutes later, that's what the audio is the equivalent of. So all our work is on finding the most original, the original element, and getting it in our hands, and having Nick Berg, who's a total genius, our sound guy. He did all the work on American Epic, which 1920s and 30s recordings, that is super sophisticated stuff to get that. So he has the best systems for transferring us. So what you're hearing is exactly what you would have heard in 1969 if you were playing that material on the best playback system on the planet. And so with the studio recordings, we obviously, with the blessing of Led Zeppelin, you have the access to the master tapes, you have access to the reissues that have been done for the different, digital media and stuff like that. But we chose an unusual route that with the studio recordings, we used the original lacquer cuts that were made for the original commercial releases of those records, because some of those lacquer cuts, like Bob Ludwig's cut of the second Led Zeppelin album, or George Pyrrhus's one of the first album, are mind-blowing. And that is what the public, or at least some of the public, would have heard the day it came out, these cuts. And so we're giving you something that is the purest thing to what you'd have heard in 69. And we're not messing with it. And we're not changing it to some perception of a modern taste. We're giving it to exactly as you would have heard it. So I'm trying to remove every element between what I'm holding in with my hand and what you're hearing on the screen. And the only thing we will do is if there is a live recording that's made and it's been done quickly and there's clearly some shortcoming in it, like the bass is under recorded, with analog equipment, we might slightly boost the bottom end on a live recording that's been done just quickly on a board. But with all the studio stuff, all the sessions that they played on, it's absolutely the pure original lacquers with zero compression, zero EQ. And so you're hearing in the story of the film, I want to give you, John and Lance, I want to give you the exact sound of 56, the exact sound of 64, the exact sound of 67. So when Zeppelin's record comes out in 69, you can sonically hear how different that is from the music that preceded it. I want to give that to you, so you have that in your head. So when you've heard Shirley Bassey in 65, you can hear fundamentally how different Led Zeppelin 1 was from that recording, sonically. So it's mainly, that's what it comes down to, is I think that the viewer is giving 2 hours of their time to watch this movie, 2 hours of their valuable time, and possibly up to $20, $25 of their money to pay it. So we have to give them something they absolutely cannot get on YouTube. And on YouTube deals in copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, and so we have to give the audience that are buying tickets to this thing something that it's impossible for them to get on the internet.
Bernard, go ahead with the three members. You mentioned each one of them was conducted separately. Some of them were 5 hours, some of them were 7 hours. But in the movie, it's not clear to me who was the interviewer. Were you the interviewer, or was there a third party person? And what kind of content was there a script? Did you come in prepared with a million points, or did the conversation just kind of happen?
Very prepared. Very, very prepared. Yeah, I knew exactly. I had extensive, long preliminary conversations with them going through the whole storyboard, which was to see what additionally they were adding, also to get to know them, to see if it was going to work, if they were enthusiastic, and how they talked. And then when I'd spent time with each of them, one thing was a complete hallelujah, was that they were so different from each other. And then when John's recordings, he's so different. So they really are personality-wise like north, south, east, and west, which is kind of why the group is so interesting. And they have very different ways they talk. And so I came in really prepared for how they would talk. I did the interviews with Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. Alison McGaughty, my co-writer and producer, interviewed Robert. Obviously standing there watching it, but she's interviewing it. Robert and her had developed a really nice shorthand. They kind of chatted to each other, and she was really helpful. She kind of said, "Oh, he's like a really direct guy. He just wants to tell you what's happening, And sometimes as a bloke, you kind of like you kind of go, "Oh, does so and so mean something else?" He goes, "No, he's actually just straight line." But people keep on interrupting him when he normally does interviews. They're always interrupting. Just let him talk. And she did. I thought that they chatted. I loved their conversation. I think I stepped in at the tail end of that interview. So yeah, I did those. I did the Jimmy and she did that. And very prepared, because I was trying to make the film. I wanted to give you the purest feeling that you're with these people. And I thought, if you've liked this band as I have since I was a teenager, and I thought a lot of our audience will be like that, I wanted to be able to give you guys the same feeling I had sitting in front of them, like they're talking to you, and that like they talked to me when I met them without any cameras. That's how they talked. And so I wanted to give that. And so the way I did that was so I thought, if I can do that, I don't want to have any talking heads, and I don't want to have a narrator. So you got to be really prepared, because you've got to make sure you've covered all the ground, so that when you're cutting the film, you go, who the hell is going to tell us that we flew out to America? You know what I mean? So you've got to make sure you can't just have a rambling conversation, because you've got to have the exposition to get you, from pillar to post. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was kind of, so it was a lot of preparation. But what was kind of nice is that these are these guys are like top of the game in the music world. So, you're dealing with three very bright guys. So, you just want to be really prepared when you walk in there. The point is, if you're prepared and all the facts by memory, it relaxes people, and they start chatting like you went along with the journey with them. So they're actually making observations as no, rather than, people in the interview going, no, it wasn't this, it was this,
Sure.
And so
sure.
You just got to be just, it's just got to be really prepared, and then conversation takes a different tone, it's like, and so I wanted something, I just was hoping I could give the audience something where this is these people, as you would meet them if you were a family member at a Christmas party, or if you went into a local restaurant and they were there and you were a friend of a friend, this is how they would talk to you. That's what I wanted to see.
I have a curious question going back to when you're doing the interviews, and you would have a deep shot of Robert looking at the monitor and then looking at probably Allison. And this is footage he hasn't seen in 60 years. And he's amazed. He's like a little kid, or just seeing an old friend. Bernard, was that detailed storyboard? Was that vision? Was that shot?
Yeah, that was always planned. I'd found in my films, what I find is really nice in life is like give and take.
Yeah.
Where they're giving you something and you're giving them something back. And in life, if we those parties where people turn up and they bring really nice bottles with them, and stuff, it makes a good atmosphere, And so what I'd always planned was that when the interviews came around, I wanted to be showing them stuff, like a lot of stuff that isn't shown on screen, that they hadn't seen before. And so I remember John Paul Jones, for example, there's that footage that Robert's looking at, which obviously he'd never seen footage of that before. He didn't even know it'd been shot. So it's lovely.
Mhm.
But say with John Paul Jones, there's a really big. Do you remember the bit in the film where there's so much of the film is built up from this, but the bit where he's so kind of animated talking about this priest that he managed to persuade to let him be the organ master.
Yep.
And he blags his way into being the choir master and organ master. And he's never done it before. He can play a bit of organ, but he doesn't know any hymns or anything like that. And he's never been a choir master. And he's got this particular kind of what is this? His dad said, never turn down work, no matter what it is. Great dictum. So, but he's really animated and his eyes are lit up when he's talking about the priest. That's because I found some photographs of that church that he was at, and that church had been knocked down like a couple of years after he'd been there. So that church hasn't been standing for like 50-something years.
Sure.
And so it was on the screen, so it was like, it just brought back memories for him. And so, yeah, there's so many things like that where that was always planned that I'd try and bring as much goodies with me. And I also was hoping that they would see things on the screen, performances, and it would prompt them, which it did, to comment on details.
Yeah. You stole my thunder, because one of my parting shots, one of the biggest takes from the film, let's call it a film, that I took was when you played Your Time Is Gonna Come in the organ. And I'm telling you, Bernard, for 40 plus years, since I was an 11-year-old kid when I discovered Zeppelin, I always thought, I'm like, that sounds like a church. I always thought they had organ. And here it is, because John Paul Jones played organ in a church. That's amazing. Hey, what the Zepp guys?
You brought a tear to my eye.
Yeah.
That's it. When you figure out, because that organ part always struck me when I first, where the hell did this come from? It's just like, whoa. And then when I figured this out on the church, I went, I got to put that on the screen.
Yeah.
And the song is so uplifting. I thought, if we can do that, and Dan did a wonderful job, Dan Gitlin, our editor, of creating that whole sequence. So the music is used, because this music is part of people's hearts.
Yep.
It's like they have so much time invested in these songs that they've played for years and years. And so if you create a visual, I think, for something that's never had a visual, what my dream is, can you enhance that song, enrich it, not take away from it, add to it? And so a lot of the songs, the key lyrics are moving the story forward. So, when they're on their way out to get that deal and that song's playing, it's Your Time Is Gonna Come. They're on their way to Atlantic Records.
Just amazing, man. Just
and then when they're playing the songs to the European audiences, and they don't get it, and they've got these kids with their fingers in their ears going, what is this racket? What are they playing? Communication breakdown.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, what do Zeppelin guys think of the final product?
Emotional, lovely response, really sweet response. You can read publicly Jimmy Barnamy saying, Jimmy posted something really moving about it, the response. I'm very, very touched by the response. Yeah. I mean, it's, very, very, very moving, it's their life, so it's a life, and it's a super, you're giving a picture inside this very private place. I mean, it's worth keeping in mind that one of the things I like is stories that have not been told before. One of the reasons a story can't be told legitimately, I've never watched an unauthorized Zeppelin film because I just haven't. I didn't watching this. No offense to them, but I just, my girls go to the source, talk to people. I will say something in the film that's worth mentioning. I conducted close to 170 background audio interviews with most every single person I could find that was associated with this story from this time, from people they went to school with, to producers that hired them as session musicians, to the engineers that worked on those records, Zeppelin 1 and 2. I did long interviews with those and conversations with those people for background to ensure I understood what the group were telling me, to make sure that there wasn't any dispute between what would be said on screen and what someone else thought they witnessed. So there's a lot of that in terms of what's given for the audience. It's really been thoroughly researched, and so I've spoken to all those characters. And in credit to the group, which is very touching, which is why I was kind of it was emotional to me. I remember Robert and Jimmy particularly gave me telephone numbers of some of their old personal school friends, and were like, "Here you go. You can talk to them, and they'll introduce you, God forbid, to everyone else." And so I got to wander around with their blessing, unsupervised, and to meet all the people they knew and went to school with and their friends. And so they allowed us that they'd seen American Epic and the research, and they let us do that research and just go around. And so, so what's very interesting is that the key thing is that you're getting to see a side of these people that's never been seen before, because it, as I said, the only access anyone else has is people that were at the after show parties and things like that. There was no one else inside the war room, so to speak, mission control. The only other person, Peter Grant's dead. So there's no one. It's such a private organization, Led Zeppelin. It's part of its strength. And so you're getting, thank God for this happening, you're getting a look into the whole process and how they did it and their individual thoughts and what they felt about things. And so, I just hope the world is a better place for it. It's because the reality for me is always much more interesting than all the conjecture and all the myth. Is the actual reality. It is ultimately, as you see at the beginning in the film, it's 4 little boys that are captivated by different musical things they heard, and they find some way of navigating as little boys through their lives and holding on to that little flame. And at the end of the film, I asked Jimmy, please tell some kid now, what does all this mean? What would you say to him? And he says those closing lines. He says, if you have something in yourself that's different, that's the flame. He said, you've got to work and work and work and work and work. But if your aim is true, you can achieve your dreams. This is possible because this is what happens. And he sums up, that's what the movie's about.
Bernard, there's you close the movie, right? It makes sense when you watch the movie, right? That you take it through their meetings before they even know each other, through the first tour. Led Zeppelin 1 and Zeppelin 2 are showcased, and then the big section is really about the rise of popularity in the U.S., which supersedes their own home country, right? They came bigger in the States before the UK, but there was some criticism out there, from the general public that said, well, geez, why did they cover the whole band's career? Why did they stop here? But I think when you watch it, it makes sense why you stop it there. But maybe the question is, was there any chit chat or any talk about, is there a place for another film, the next step, a sequel, or is this kind of where it should stop?
Well, okay. If I want to go on, if it's a big story, and this is a big story, what would you want? Would you want something that goes deep into it and you really feel it and you really hear it and you really see it? Or do you want something in 2 hours that skips over 10 years with little excerpts of songs? What would you prefer? What would you prefer? Would you prefer the deep dive where you're there and you can feel the garments and hear the music? Or would you like something where it's a little 15-minute second snippets of music and you do the whole career? So my sense is that the Zeppelin audience is very musically based because they don't do any PR. So it's all about the records and the shows that people saw back in the day. So people that like Zeppelin and people that will like Zeppelin are going to be into being in the music. So the whole Zeppelin story, given the caliber of the music, the quality of the music, and showing it properly, that would be a 6-hour thing to do that. I wouldn't be involved in something that skimmed through something as monumental as this. I wouldn't do it. So would there be a second, third part? Who knows? All I did know is that from childhood up to them conquering Everest musically, i.e. January 1970, around 1970, they become the biggest band in the world. Coming from nowhere against all that's clearly book 1 of a trilogy, And so my view, like Lord of the Rings, do the first film, do it properly. But I wouldn't condense Lord of the Rings into a 2-hour movie,
Absolutely.
The analogy is appropriately chosen, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I give my view is give the audience the highest quality you can with everything you possibly can in book one, and then we'll see if there's a book two and
See
book
what
three.
happens.
Yeah.
So,
that's it.
Thanks
So
for
yeah,
sharing that.
there was
So-
no thought of skimming through and like, rushing
No.
through. No.
Of course.
Okay.
So Bernard, what's your plan to promote this? In sharing some emails with Allison, she mentioned you're going to the Cannes Film Festival. Like, what's your year look like? And then talk about the expansion of this in terms of streaming. And you mentioned up the top of the hour, it's going to hit more theaters, but how are you going to roll this thing out in a broader base plan for this year?
Well, it's had a pretty extensive theatrical release, very extensive theatrical release. It was playing in over 1,000 cinemas in America, due to public demand after the IMAX release. And then it's being re-released in America on Friday in cinemas. It's just gone on to, is it SVOD, or is where you can buy or rent the film, So it's not streaming, but it's where you can buy or rent it from Amazon. So it's on those sites and Apple and all those sites where, and then there will be obviously, to be revealed what happens down the line. But yeah, it's my hope is it's gone wonderfully well. I mean, I've just been hugely touched. I said I looked at it as an art house film, and I was happy it was playing in my local. I really didn't think about commerciality. I just loved the story. It hadn't been told before, and I wanted to do it. It was only actually when the film was finished, and I went to that Fire Aid concert in LA, and Pink came on and did a very kind of faithful version of the "Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You" arrangement that they do on the first album, and I was in the forum, and I heard Jimmy's arrangement of that song, and I was like, Jesus God, this is stunning piece of like dynamics. And I watched the audience, their response to it compared to all the other pieces of music, and I went, my God, this is the mother. And I turned to Alice and I went, we're doing the Led Zeppelin film. That was the first time we dropped something, I just think that.
Well, the film is Becoming Led Zeppelin. Bernard McMahon, thank you, man. We could go on all day. And as a radio guy, I have one last question. Where did you get the Wolfman Jack footage? Because that was fantastic. When Robert Plant's talking to Wolfman Jack, New York City, and some girl calls up and tells Robert Plant that he's a fox. And Robert Plant's like, a fox? What's a fox? Where'd you get that?
Well, it was basically the band had said to us that they didn't do any AM radio and this stuff, but they did do these FM underground stations, and they play whole-sided albums, and they just take calls from random people. And so I managed to track down some of these radio things, and of course, the Wolfman Jack one. I mean, I love American Graffiti. You got to use that one, Yeah. So yeah, it was wonderful, and and NBC I think had footage of him. So it was terrific. It was like a real lovely thing to be able to put together, because that's such an iconic figure from cinema and from music, that it's
70s AM, FM radio and Zeppelin, and just a great piece of work, sir. And we look forward to possibly more. And thank you for spending the time with us today. We appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And very touching to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bernard. Have a good one. Travel safely.
Thanks, Bernard. Cheers.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.